Hi, everybody. I'm Amelia.
I'm Tom.
We're
And
in we're in Luke 17. Take it
right,
away, Tom. Take it away, Tom.
this is Jesus' parable. The apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And Jesus said, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, and you would be able to say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing the fields or tending the sheep, come right away and take your place here at the table? No, wouldn't you rather say to your slave, come here, prepare supper for me, and put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink, and then later you can eat and drink? Do you think that you're going to thank the slave for doing what he was ordered and commanded to do? So also you, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.
Is that it, Tom?
That's it.
Oh, all right. Yeah, great. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So we
well,
have
not
this.
quite, but
Yeah. We have this kind of one-liner at the beginning about, well, the disciples come. That's the setting. The disciples come and ask it. They don't really ask. They sort of demand, increase our faith. And Jesus says this thing about the mulberry tree. What do you think? What are they getting at? What do they mean by increase our faith?
well, I think it is on the one hand that they want to understand more about the kingdom of God and to have their faith be, to grow by increased knowledge and understanding of the kingdom of God, of what it is that Jesus is talking about. On the other hand, it's also, I think, that they just, want more confidence, and that their uncertainty and their doubt would be, minimized so that they can project and do what they want to do as disciples.
And Jesus responds to that request or command or demand or whatever by saying if they had even the faith of a mustard seed, is
The size of a mustard seed.
size?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So small faith,
Really small.
really small, that they'd be able to tell a mulberry tree to be planted in the sea and it would happen. I don't know. How do we?
Typical Jesus saying.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
So he's
impossible.
yeah.
That wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But what the emphasis is on paying attention to the degree of faith that you do have. If you had just even this smallest amount of faith, and you may, then it has great results. It has major impact. It grows and increases. And so to have then an increase in faith, if you're pondering then what's the little bit of faith that one has, and see the difference that makes, then imagine what would be possible if you had more faith.
Okay. Well, that helps. So it's not so much he's turning them down. He's just saying, pay attention. Even if you have a little bit, you can do great things. Is that
right?
Okay.
Right.
All right. Now,
Yep.
So then he goes into this. I don't know if it's exactly a parable, but sort of
Well, it's kind of a parable.
anyway, about slaves and masters and obligations and not expecting a reward and all of that. Is there a connection between, I mean, my first question is there a connection between this increasing your faith issue and what follows? Or are they sort of two separate things?
Well, they're basically two separate things.
Okay.
You can see them as both addressing dimensions of faith, but they're really two separate sayings that have been brought together by Luke.
Okay, so it's pretty it's hard because we know in this country slavery was justified by biblical passages. This seemed like this would be an easy way to justify the keeping of humans for your own service and benefit. Was Jesus is he advocating slavery, or just accepting the way things are and not questioning them, or what would you say about that?
Well, there are two things to say. One is that the institution of slavery in the ancient world was very different than chattel slavery in 17th to 19th century American slavery. They were very different. And I don't think they were better. Slavery was a terrible institution in the ancient world. Apparently, from what we're able to discern from the records, from 33 to 40% of people were slaves. So slavery was a huge institution that was simply a given. And so there is no record, for example, of any person, any author in the ancient world protesting or attacking the institution of slavery. It was simply a given. Okay. And there are several of Jesus' parables reflect then this institution. And so he is clearly using it as a metaphor for the kingdom of God and for one's response to the possibility of doing something good. So part of what he is reacting to in this saying is the expectation that you'll be rewarded for doing what you were simply ordered to do, as if there's some great virtue in that, and that instead to simply do what you were required to do, ordered to do by God, is then something that you would simply expect to do, and that you don't expect to get some big reward for doing what you were expected to do.
Okay, so it's a little bit works against works righteousness, that you think that if you kind of follow God's commands or follow Jesus's, what he asked for, that you'll receive rewards. So I don't know, prosperity gospel kind of stuff. Is that one way?
Well, there was, the Deuteronomic theology was very present, which is that if you are righteous, that you'll be rewarded, and if you're evil, you will be punished. So this is then a reaction against this notion that because you have done what you should do, because you've obeyed the commands from God, that you will somehow be rewarded. Rather, it is that out of gratitude, that you will do what is commanded by God.
Mm-hmm. Do we assume that Jesus's listeners had slaves or were slaves, or who might have his audience have been, and how would that make some difference to how they might receive this?
Well, this saying implies that a significant number of his listeners had slaves. And it also implies that there are slaves in the audience. So if there were, like a third of the people were slaves, then Jesus was clearly addressing a broadly representative audiences of Galileans, and that would have included slaves is, I think, quite likely. But what's being addressed is people who had slaves, and so he's appealing to their experience and what they would normally do, which is that they'd expect their slave to get dinner and serve them while they're eating.
Okay, but he wasn't just, the point of it wasn't so much to affirm their social construct or ways of doing things. Right. It was for them to understand more like the nature of God and our relationship with God.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And that can sort of easily be missed, I think, if people have their own agendas around rationalizing their own social systems. But I guess we should always be paying attention to what Jesus is saying about our relationship with God, and not be looking for ways to justify our relationship necessarily with social constructs.
Right. Yep. Well, this metaphor, this, I think, parable, effectively, is it's about slave owners who are gruff and reflect, I think, the character of the owners of land and slaves in the Galilean world. And Jesus is using that then as a metaphor for the expectation that you would simply do what you're required, what you're ordered to do by God out of gratitude and thanksgiving, and not expect some big reward.
Okay. So how would you say this passage relates to today's concerns around peace and justice? And any I mean, we could preach against it. So that was my first thought. Oh, this is god awful. I would, but I kind of understand how it is helpful. But on the other hand, there's an awful lot about it that seems very unhelpful. So answer that question for us.
Well, one of the situations that we have now in the United States and in the world is that rich people think that because they're wealthy and privileged because they've been so good, and they use that as a basis of rationalization for the growing distance between the rich and the poor, and that those policies are justified because they're righteous and the poor people, they're no good. And so that attitude is very present. What this then does is to set that in the context of there is no justification at all for thinking that you've been gifted because you're righteous. You simply have done what you are ordered to do and what the possibilities are. And so the impact of this for ministries of peace and justice now is to approach things with humility, and that the gifts that you've received are gifts to be thankful for, but they're not the basis for justifying then social inequity and the accumulation of wealth by the rich. because they're more righteous.
Yeah, well, and if anything, that they should be, and all of us who seem to have more than a lot of others do, should be paying attention to the what Jesus expects of us in relation to those who don't have as much in the poor. So,
Right.
if we think
We're
of,
unworthy servants.
yeah,
We're unworthy slaves.
yeah,
And so
okay, well, thank you, Tom.
well,
I feel a little bit better about this story. And those of you who are watching, spend some time reflecting on this, seeing what you think about it, and whether or not, it's even something we want to, how we're going to deal with this. If you follow the lectionary and have to deal with it, what might be there to bring out of it that would be productive in today's world and faithful to the teachings of Jesus. Thanks for watching.
all right. Have a great week.